Mark Johnson is the owner of Artisan Restoration. Mark and his crew travel the country restoring old barns and log cabins. Mark prides himself on quality and creative work. After completing the roof on this round barn, the owner was searching for an economical way to replace the old wooden cupola and suggested using an old silo roof. Mark Johnson made it happen. As log cabin restoration specialists, Mark Johnson and his crew perform on-site restoration and maintenance on historic buildings. And that's where we find him today, at the historic Borgeson cabin, named after Swedish immigrants Carl and Clara Borgeson, who in 1866 homesteaded near what is now Norseland, Minnesota. In 1986, Gustavus Adolphus College purchased the Borgeson cabin and had it moved to the campus Arboretum in commemoration of the school's Swedish heritage. This is the second time Mark has worked on this cabin. During the tornado outbreak of '98, an F3 tornado hit St. Peter, Minnesota, toppling the Borgeson cabin, and the college called Mark to reassemble the cabin on a new foundation.
These are stones that were tucked underneath the cabin where it stood before, and when we did the slab here, we gathered up all those stones and we placed them inside of our concrete form to give them a stone face, and then we stripped the concrete form early, and we took our pressure washer and we pressure washed all this concrete, which is called exposed aggregate today. You see it a lot on sidewalks, but we did that to give it an old look.
Today, almost 20 years later, Mark has been asked to revisit the Borgeson cabin and give it a full restoration.
What we have to do here is some structural work that's going to involve drilling a hole and inserting a threaded rod into the floor system. We might have to take up a few floorboards on the one end where it comes out on the other side of the building. But we're going to take this threaded rod and we're going to put nuts on each end of it, and we're actually going to squeeze the building back together again to push this log back where it belongs and prevent it from creeping out any further. Some of the logs have started to deteriorate from the moisture, and also another a problem. We've got a lot of squirrels around here, and in a couple of areas they've actually chewed into the wood and chewed into the chinking. We've got a couple logs that are bad, and the bad portion of the log that's decayed is simply the outermost part of the log. So we don't have to do a complete replacement of the log, and we just take off the outer 2 inches by cutting it with a saw and chiseling out that outer face. And then from my inventory of other old logs that we have from other cabins, we'll cut the face off of that log and we'll fasten it to the area using a combination of adhesives and screws to give it a new face on the outside. We have the Northern Bedrock crew for 10 days straight, and we're going to get a lot of work accomplished.
The teams have been working for 3 days now.
We've got a lot accomplished. We've got all the logs cleaned up. The old chinking was removed. The logs were buffed with a couple of different tools in order to get the old material off and some of the old stain. And we have put on new stain, obviously, but before we did that, we treated the logs with boron-based preservative. And before the chinking goes in, we have to put in backer foam. We've got a couple of different types of material going in here. This is some pre-cut material.
There are surprises in every restoration project.
We've uncovered some badly decayed logs. We'll be taking this down later. We had a little bad weather yesterday, but we're taking out these logs here and replacing them. So we'll be treating the new logs, and we'll be treating some of these areas here for the decay. nice hollow log there. Well, Dan, we're gonna start pounding this log in here. I don't think we're gonna get it much further than this over here. So I'll tighten this up a little bit more, and then we'll go look at the other corner on the other side of the building, and we'll see whether or not we can do the same over there. I can practice my golf swing here. Nick, you want to give it a couple of turns over there for me?
There's backer foam in there.
Oh, that'll squash.
Okay.
Main thing I'm worried about is if there's room down here.
With the shifting log secured back in place, Mark begins chinking lessons with the Northern Bedrock crew.
Well, we are putting acrylic chinking on the joints between the logs here, and we're using a chink pump here that really speeds things up and helps out with our production time when we have such large joints as 4 or 5 inches, like right here. So John, why don't you apply some with the chink pump here?
All right.
The pump has a variable speed motor, so we can adjust it and speed it up as John gets better and better at doing this, right?
Yep.
So this is called tooling, and the main purpose of it is to make sure that we force the chinking material up against the log so we achieve this 2-point adhesion that I talked about. The chinking that we're using here is an acrylic chinking made by Permachink, and it comes in several different colors. This happens to be called Stone, which is the matching color for what was here originally. Our specifications for this project were to match the same color of the stain as before and the same color of the chinking. Right now we're going to be using some Armor Guard to treat our logs against insects. So we're going to let this dry for a little bit so the material that I've forced down into the cracks doesn't run out on me. This was notched out to go in the wall around the back side of the cabin. I'm going to be using an Osborne brush here, which has Teflon bristles, I believe, that have aggregate in them so that it has an abrasive or sanding effect on the logs, and it really does a nice job. It cleans all the dirt off of it and a lot of the punky wood, so this log will end up looking pretty much like that, except for it being a different species, I believe. B's going to come over here and demonstrate the correct way to do this with a dust mask on and ear protection and eye protection. Well, we're replacing a log right here today, and it seemed pretty hollow and rotten when we started, but after we got into it further, we realized that there's still quite a bit of good wood here. So we've saved that wood, and we're just splicing in a custom-made piece on top of it. My motto is go big or go home, I guess. Now we got to take the edges off of this and make it look a little bit more like a natural log. This is a hand adze, it's called. And it's a regular axe would work here, or hatchet probably, but I happen to have this in my bucket, so. And this is a slicked. They originally were invented to peel the logs and get the bark off of them, but they're a tremendous tool for doing work like this and kind of doing a planing job on the log. This log is a little bit thinner than the other log next to it here, so I've beveled the edge here a little bit to make it line up on the face side. All right, I'm going to put some screw fasteners here, which hopefully will countersink themselves below the surface, and then we can put a little dab of wood filler or caulking over the top of them. I'm using Permachink Woodsman sealant in here instead of the chinking material because I want it to blend in better. This is a tan color, and I guess it'll blend in pretty good after I put stain over it. Well, the good thing about the Woodsman caulking is it does take stain. I'll probably stay away from it, let it dry a little bit more before I go right on it. You can see here how it does take the stain pretty good and hides those little spots where I put the screws in. Usually we put all our stain on with a sprayer and then we back brush it to make sure that we get it worked in all the cracks and so forth, and it evens out the coating. The sprayer is just a faster means of getting it on the wall than using a brush and a pail for the entire application. We were using boron solutions to treat the logs, and that was a spray-on application that we did over all the log surfaces before we put the stain on. Well, in addition to that, we're also doing a concentrated boron application in the form of these little rods that have the ability to treat the wood after the moisture content gets up over 20–25%. It starts to dissolve the rods, and it actually treats the wood, so it's like a moisture activated timed release when you need it. Let's see, these rods are about 3 inches long, so I'd like to make sure that they're at least that deep. If you don't use the little peg to drive them in, they're so brittle they actually break and shatter. To seal the moisture out, we're going to put some caulking over the top of each one. Here's where one of the old rods was drilled in before. So now we're going to do all of the logs to make sure that all the corners are protected, because the way that trees were designed was to draw moisture in through the end grain. And anyhow, just because the logs have been dead for 150 years doesn't mean that doesn't work anymore. So they still are absorbing water and still need to be treated. So we've hollowed it out and gotten all the deteriorated material out. Brush handle extension. It's pretty deep. That's a good idea. Now we're going to use this epoxy primer. It's a real thin epoxy, kind of like consistency of varnish. That's used as a consolidant to adhere to the edges of the wood, and it provides a base for the installation of the epoxy wood, which we'll put on next after this is hardened. The epoxy wood, it's a paste-like epoxy. We'll be embedding other chunks of good wood in it. Cuts down on the quantity of the material needed without sacrificing the quality.
Tap it in further.
I'll cut it off, clean it up, and that should last for another many years.
On the inside, we have had to do some chinking repair in a couple of areas where we pulled the logs in when we were installing those steel rods here, and we were beating on the wall with that huge beetle. We knocked some of the material loose and we had to replace that. Second to the last thing maybe we did was we were asked to do a change order and coat the inside of the cabin with the same armor guard wood preservative that we did on the outside. And this is for insect control on the inside of the building. We don't need it for the fungus and rot and so forth that occurs on the outside. But as you can see here, there's a number of little holes in the wood made by powder post beetles, most likely. In order to treat the logs that we've got here, a person would actually have to go around and inject it into each one of these. But we'll wait and see how effective our treatment is, and after you see the fine material, the powder coming out of the holes, we could maybe come back and inject those areas only where we know we've got an active infestation, instead of trying to do every one of these holes, which would take days to do. The siding work was all chewed up by squirrels before, that were gnawing holes everywhere in it, and we've installed a fiber cement product that isn't exactly squirrel proof according to their warranty, but I think that it's the strongest product that we could possibly find, other than maybe steel siding or something, which really wouldn't look very historically appropriate on this building. The last step in the refinishing process involves a coat of advanced clear sealer, which is made by Permachink, and that covers everything on the entire building. The chinking, the logs, and the entire structure. One of the other things we've done is we've used this material here called Checkmate on the smaller joints in the logs. We use these on anything that faces inward or is maybe level. We fill those with this material to make sure that we don't get any moisture in here. All right, well, we've finally completed our work here at the Gustavus cabin.
For those looking to own or restore a historic log cabin, Artisan Restoration is ready to salvage and restore these old treasures.